Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's video. The first thing I want you to do is review this assignment for this week. This should sort of start becoming a pattern where we're going to know that when we engage in this module, that we're going to read the assignment in its entirety. It's going to include the assignment, the description, a little bit of background. It's going to give a rubric and a student exemplar. There's only one reading this week, which is the debasing of education. But if you look at the syllabus going forward, you're going to start having two each week. So if you're someone who's a little bit slower reader and you have more time this week, try to read ahead a week and then push that going forward. Okay. But in this video, we're going to first review Sinek's just cause principles, and then we're going to connect them to the student work that I saw within your applied learning assignment. And then I'm going to set the stage for your next assignment, which is Expression to Experience 2, the debasing of education, where you're going to critically examine how assessment impacts student motivation. Let's start with Sinek. When we look at the idea of resilient from Sinek, education is constantly evolving, and students are going to be required to adapt to these changes. A contemporary example of this is the recent shifts in federal education policy regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI programs. Now, some argue that these changes promote a focus on merit-based education and individual achievement, while others believe they remove the necessary supports systems that enable equitable access and learning opportunities. Rather than debating which side is right and which side is wrong, the key question I want us to think about is this: how can we design policies that maintain fairness while also fostering individual excellence in the political climate we currently live in? This is where resilience comes in. Educators and students must adapt to these changes while also ensuring that the learning environments remain supportive and effective for all learners. Inclusivity. Sinek defines inclusivity as ensuring that everyone can participate at a level they're able to contribute. This aligns directly with differentiation in education. True inclusion doesn't mean separate assignments. It means structuring lessons so that all students can work towards the same goal, but just in different ways. Think about a history project. Instead of assigning different tasks to struggling and advanced students, the entire class worked towards the same essential question. Some students might research and write an essay, others may create a documentary or podcast, while others may present a visual timeline. Notice that every student engages in the learning process at a level that best suits them and their strengths, but they're all contributing to the same conversation, right? The debate over the DEI policies brings up a similar question. How do we ensure that all students have access to success without lowering expectations? And finally, for service orientation, Sinek's view of service-oriented leadership places the student as the priority, shifting the focus from teaching as content delivery to teaching as student development. Notice this will differ from Alan's perspective, which sees assessment as validation of learning rather than a tool for student growth. Neither approach is neither right or wrong. What it's about is finding the lens to which to view from that fits how you as a future teacher would like to teach. Do you see yourself designing assessments to conform knowledge and to test knowledge and to present that to colleges like Alan suggests? Or do you see yourself designing assessments to shape and guide the learning process in a way that's aligned with Sinek? This is something to consider as we move forward. Likewise, in policy decisions, we must ask, how do we ensure that policies serve students and do not become ideological battles? How do we ensure that they communicate the important things that learning is about with, once again, not becoming an ideological battle? Now let's talk about our work. What I saw across the board, I saw some really strong connections between just cause and assessment. Many of you picked up on how assessments can either empower or limit student learning, and you tied this to real-world examples. Assessment reuse and systemic issues. Several of you noted how assessment, when used year after year without reflection, can become stale and ineffective rather than a tool for growth. Equity and representation in assessment. One particular insightful example was the fake baby project and how representation matters in the materials you use. For the fake baby, this is the project where everybody gets a baby to bring home, as if you're pregnant and you have to watch it. And the student talked about how they had multiple races of babies, and I've been in schools where there's only one, right? This is the kind of critical thinking that will make us stronger educators. And then finally, the revision-based learning and exit tickets. We saw some great practical applications like using formative assessment cycle to shift learning from a one and done event to an ongoing process. As we move forward, I want us thinking about the difference between expert versus novice thinking, right? One theme I noticed this week is the difference between novice and the expert thinking in your papers. A novice often speaks in generalities, saying things like assessment should be fair without defining what fair actually means with specific examples, right? While an expert thinks in specifics, they explain how fairness is ensured through either structured rubrics, formative assessment, and revision cycles. In your feedback, I included my recursive Bloom's framework to help scaffold your thinking from general understanding towards deeper application. So you're going to see that language within my feedback that I'm giving you. The goal here is to help you move beyond just describing what assessment should be into designing real, actionable strategies that will shape your future classroom. This is also going to connect deeply to Chapter 2, which is going to talk about Bloom's taxonomy and scaffolding learning. So let's move on to our next assessment, right? And before I do that, once again, I thought that the assignments that I read were excellent. If you did not submit an assignment, make sure you get that done as soon as possible. All right, so what's next? Well, we have the debasing of education. Now, in this assignment, we're shifting gears to explore a bigger question. What happens when education stops being about learning and starts being about achieving external rewards? This week reading comes from Barry Schwartz, and it's from a book called The Cost of Living. He's an economist, economic teacher, or was, he passed away, where he argues that education has become instrumentalized, meaning it has become less about curiosity and more about grades, test scores, and Collins' emissions, sort of aligned with Allen's framework, and he's going to critique it. Now, why this matters? I want you to think about your own schooling. Have you ever studied just to get a good grade rather than actually learn something? What impact did that have on your learning? Not necessarily for the day of the test, but 3, 4 weeks later, a month later, maybe a year later. How much of that did you retain? Right? And so, have you also ever felt like education was more about playing the game, right? Figuring out what I need to write than growing as a person? Schwartz is going to argue that this mindset is a direct result of how we assess students. When grades become the main goal, learning itself is going to take a back seat. We want you to explore how that shaped your experience and how you, as a future educator, can push back against this trend. As a reminder, in everything we read, you can write in a way that agrees with the reading, or you can maybe give some counter examples and things that you disagree with. Now, as we prepare, you want to start in week 4. You'll have 2 readings that are. I'm sorry, starting in week 4, not this week, but the next week. You're going to have 2 book readings assignments per week. So once again, if you want to get ahead, start reading chapter 2. Right. And this chapter is especially important because we're going to be using Bloom's taxonomy throughout everything we do. Right. So my final thought on this: the way we assess students directly shapes their motivation and engagement with learning. If we want to design assessments that inspire curiosity rather than just performance, we have to think critically about how we structure our classrooms, right? Carol Dweck, who's quoted within the article by Schwartz, talks about the difference between achievement mastery or achievement motivation and mastery motivation, or achievement orientation and mastery orientation. I want you to think about that, right? So in closing, as always, if you have questions, reach out. I'm going to make sure that you get what you need. Send me emails or something if you have something coming up in advance, right? That way I know. But with that said, we have now fully integrated Synec's 3 elements: resilience, inclusive, and service orientation, right? Allen's alternative perspective, encouraging students to find their way of their, both of these should be getting you to find your way of like your teaching philosophy. We're beginning to talk about scaffolding students from novice to expert thinking, and we should always be looking for connections between the past, present, and future assignments. And once again, your overall goal is to look at these articles not as a framework of what we have to do, but as different concepts and ideas so that you can construct an assessment environment that's aligned with how you want to teach. Have a great day.